Okay, let's start with early Christian architecture. So, consider this a classic, typical church plan, and I'll mention the parts of it. This is our apse or the altar, and these parts attached to it is your ambulatory space. And this area is your chancel, which is used for choirs and other stuff. Now, the space or the part which intersects is transept. I'll talk about transept later, but let's move on for now. This middle portion is called nave, and the sides on both the side is our aisles. This is our narthex, and this is almost like a transition space before you step into the church. Then we have our atrium, and then finally the porch or the entrance. Now, transept is a space which intersects the nave at 90 degrees perpendicular to it, and most of the times or sometimes, and this channel is provided below it. So the plan would be like, this is your transept, and all the space would be nave, while you have a smaller portion for the choir which is called as the chancel. Mostly it is this way, sometimes it's here. And then another thing about the transept is what led to the development of transept is there used to be a raised platform here. This raised platform was called bema, and this led to the development of transept. And this bema was used by the clergy to have them separated from the congregation. So this is your typical early Christian plans. Now we can concentrate on our Romanesque. No, sorry, we have to go Byzantine and then we have to talk about Romanesque. So Byzantine architecture. So what began Byzantine architecture is the Emperor of Rome, Constantine, moved his capital from Rome to Byzantium, and thus the name Byzantine. But this Byzantium is our present day Istanbul, and it is a story that later Constantine was captured. So not captured, this Byzantium was conquered by Ottoman Turks, and that led to having a lot of Islamic influence on it. But early Byzantine had a lot of influence from the Roman era. If you look about the church, they followed the Greek cross. Now there are two types of crosses. One is this, and the other is this. So a Greek cross is the one which has equal distance on all the side, and this is your Latin cross. Okay, another important thing that I forgot to mention regarding church plan is that this part is your east and the entrance is towards west all the time. So this is an important thing to remember. Now back to Byzantine architecture. And since they used a Greek cross, most of their plans were centralized. So they had a centralized planning. And they used a lot of mosaics. And they also played with light a lot to create a heavenly atmosphere within the churches. So what they did is they let light through a thin sheet of alabaster. Create so that this softly illuminates the interiors. And other important features is our squinches and pendentives. Now both were support system for dome. Both had a square base. Let me talk about pendentive first. So this is pendentive. This is your dome, and this had triangular curves that helped the dome to sit on it. And if we see squinches, so squinches were more rigid and more crude, while these were a lot more seamless, and they had this triangular curves that helped the dome sit on it more seamlessly, while they had wedges, arch shaped, that was present on all the four sides for the dome to sit on it. Then we can talk about examples of Byzantine architecture. We have Hagia Sophia, the architect is Isidore and Anthemius. Now Hagia Sophia was first constructed to be a church, and then later it was converted to a mosque, and then later to a museum. Now it had a centralized planning. So like this was their apse, and they had two narthex. At the center was their dome, and supporting it were two half domes or semi domes and several other small domes attached to it. So this was their inner narthex, their outer narthex, their apse, their main dome, and it was 1 or 2 feet wide, which means 1 or 2 feet is the diameter. These two are their semi-domes, and it provides support to the main dome. And the main dome was supported on pendentives. And that's about Hagia Sophia. Let's see some images. So this is your Hagia Sophia, and before it was converted into a mosque, like when it was captured by the Ottoman Turks, they constructed 4 minarets around it. So this is Hagia Sophia. And this is Santa Sofia in Ukraine. This is San Marco in Venice. And this is Saint Basil in Moscow. And these are onion domes, so that is important to remember. Now I think we can move on to Romanesque. So during the medieval era or pre-Romanesque, or even during Romanesque, it was a period of conflicts and political unrest. So a lot of these structures had defensive elements to them. Like for example, they had something called as cross windows, and these were used by crossbowmen to shoot arrows at the invaders. They looked like an inverted cross. So this is how they looked. Then there were crenellations and crenellations. They were also called as battlements. So these are made at the roof. It's like this. Mostly the parapet is designed this way, and these were used by the archers to hide when they are not attacking at the invaders. Then Romanesque followed a Latin cross in plans. So they followed this cross in the planning system. Then they used a lot of round arches, barrel walls, and they had something called the cruciform piers. So they looked something like this in plan, and like they used to go like this in the elevation. So they used cruciform piers, and if you see a cross section of a church, so this is your nave, this is your aisle. they used a half barrel vault, and here it is a full barrel vault. And then again a roof. So this space was used for the light to go through, and the system that they used is clear story windows. And below the clear story window, or sometimes even above it or at it, there is something called triforium, which is a series of arches, and sometimes they had a bit of a passage to it, sometimes it was just like blind ornamentation, and in case if it has a passage, it was used by the cleaners to clean, or to hang tapestry during celebrations and etc. So this entire row is your triforium. And this is your cruciform pyre. This is the best picture that I could find. So yeah, this is your triforium. And let's talk about examples of Romanesque architecture. The one famous example that almost all of us know is the Pisa Cathedral. So they had which included the baptistry hall, the cathedral, the baptistry hall, and the bell tower. Right. Talking about bell towers also become an important feature of the Romanesque architecture. And these were most of the times were free, that is they were separate and they were not constructed with the baptistry hall or Pisa Cathedral, and it is called campanile. So apart from the Pisa Cathedral, we have some other examples. These are few examples, and this is Church of no it's not wait I'm sorry, this is Santa Maria Mayor Cathedral at Lisbon, which is in Portugal. This is our Abbey Church at Cluny. This is Church of Apostle. Sorry, spelling. At Cologne, Germany. And this is Saint Ambrogio in Milan. So these are some of the examples of Romanesque architecture. Now we can move on to Gothic. So Gothic, the first thing that most of us can remember about Gothic is the extensive use of ornamentation. They had a lot of pointed arches, and they had rose windows. Now in rose window, they used a technique called tracery, and this is nothing but stonework or woodwork to form geometric patterns on which the stained glass is placed. So that's how you get your rose windows. Then they had flying buttresses, and mind you, there were buttresses present even in the Romanesque era, but they were solid. In Gothic, what they did is, if this is your buttress, they made arches in it so that the entire weight of the buttresses is reduced by a huge margin, and this meant that the wall and the roof of the building or the structure is supported entirely by the flying buttresses. So they had flying buttresses, and they used ribbed walls again. So ribbed walls, they formed ribs made of stones, and these were so strong that it meant that light materials can be used in the space between them. So for example, if this is your rib, these places that needs to be filled can be filled with lighter materials, so the weight of the walls is also reduced, and that meant they could explore a lot with walls. So they went ahead and had very complex walls such as quadripartite walls and sexpartite walls. Oh sorry, these are walls, I'm so sorry. And both the ribbed walls and the flying buttresses were helped in reducing the weight of the structure, and that meant a lot of height can be explored. So verticality was an important feature or mostly seen in all the Gothic structures. That is, the height of the buildings were really huge. Then other features of Gothic architecture is they had gargoyles. So these gargoyles are like very scary looking sculptures. Which were used for water spout. Now, gargoyles had a function to them. That is, they were used as water spouts. If they were not used as a water spout and they were just scary looking sculptures on their own, then they were called grotesques. And they had spire and pinnacle. Spires were placed on top of towers, so they were huge, high pitched, thing, cone like stuff that was placed on towers. Pinnacles are these small elements that looks kind of similar to spires but are very smaller in size, and they could be placed anywhere. Like they could be placed on buttresses or even on top of a spire, something like that. So they had spire and pinnacles, and they had crockets. So in the roof, that is in the gables, they had almost like floral kind of elements that is popping out, and these are called crockets. And yeah, so they started also having galleries. Now I'm not sure about the galleries part, that is galleries as in, say, for example, let's say this is your nave, your aisles, they had pointed arches, so I'm drawing one. And outer it is your, flying buttresses and stuff. But this space that overlooks the nave is called your gallery. Like, people can stand here, look down. So they had galleries. And I think even some of the Romanesque churches had galleries. I'm not sure about that. And so what they did is they had staircase leading up to the, what is that, leading up to the galleries here. Now let's talk about example of Gothic architecture. So the one known thing that we all know is Notre Dame. Then let's see other examples. So this is your croquettes. This is gargoyle. And you can see these are pinnacles. Now, this is King's College Chapel in UK. And this is Westminster Abbey. This is Lincoln Cathedral. I did not include a picture of Notre Dame because that is something all of us know. Now we are done with Gothic. Let's move on to Renaissance. So up to Gothic, the level of ornamentation increased and Gothic was at the peak. So what happened with Renaissance is they wanted to go back. They wanted clean structures, less ornamentation, and that's what they did. So they started having a lot of interest in the restoration of classical antiquity. And also they started in Italy and then went to France and then moved up to England, etc. So they had showed a lot of interest in the restoration of classical antiquities, and then that means they took almost all of the elements or features of Greek and Rome. They took the orders, the domes, the walls, arches, etc. And orders, they had used something called as the giant orders, which is of course your basic Greek or Roman column, but they raised the height of it extremely large, like going up to 2-3 stories high. So Like this could be your 3-story building and the columns could go extremely high. Then they used pilasters in a lot of places, like even in windows they used pilasters. Like this is your column, they just gave, and this was their window. So even there they used a lot of pilasters. And since Renaissance also had to do a lot with art and painting, remember this, that they strived to do a lot of picture perfect perspectives. That is, your entire building can be viewed from one particular point, that kind of sense. So they had that. And so that was about Renaissance architecture. I think we can talk about some examples. So these are your giant orders that I was talking about. You can see this is going up to 2-story, and you can see the pilasters for the windows here. This is Villa Rotonda by Andrea Palladio. Now, the one thing that I want to say about this plan, it's a very quick thing, is it was a square plan. You can wonder why the name Rotunda came, so I'm talking about that. And they had porch on all the 4 sides. They had this dome which was circle, well and good, but if you connected all the porches, it formed a circle. So that's why it was called Villa Rotunda. Then this was Florence Cathedral. By Filippino Brunelleschi. This is your St. Peter Cathedral. This is St. Paul Cathedral. And this is your Louvre Museum. So yes, Louvre Museum was a Renaissance architecture. This glass pyramid was later added by IMPI. So don't get confused. And then this is Chateau de Chamford. And this was done by Sebastian Serlio. So that's about Renaissance architecture. The things that you have to remember is the revival of classical order or restoration of classical antiquities, picture perfect perspectives, and they had giant orders. They used pilasters a lot, and that's about it. Then we can move on to Mannerism. So Mannerism is, yes, in Renaissance they were using getting inspired from a lot of classical architecture, but Mannerism started having a lot of fun, is what Mannerism is about. So they started exploring styles. They did take they did follow the Renaissance architecture, but what they did is they started, you know, uh, distorting the columns. So they had started to distort, for killing the spelling of this. Yeah, distorting the columns. Sometimes it was, too small or too high, too slender, and they had asymmetrical planning. The buildings had a lot of tension to it. Like, it was more like you go around the building and you explore and you find, little puzzles, little riddles, like you experience the building as such. So one example is Laurentian Library. And this was done by Michelangelo. One important feature, or the main feature of Laurentian Library, is the lava staircase. So yeah, this is your lava staircase. Because they believed it to be flowing like a lava or like a waterfall or a river. No, river doesn't. Yeah, river does flow. So that is an important feature of Laurentian Library. Then after Mannerism we had Baroque. So Baroque still, followed the asymmetrical planning and stuff. But it also involved a lot of curves, like concave and convex curve. This was more grandeur. A lot of, churches and public buildings were mostly there. So churches, public building, that is like huge monumental scale buildings. And this had more decorations compared to Mannerism. And they also, played a lot with light and shadow, which is called the chiaroscuro, which is the play of light and shadow. And they had something called as the Salmonic columns, which is your twisted columns. So Baroque still followed asymmetrical planning, but it had a lot of curves to it. It was more grandeur, had more decorations, played a lot with light and shadows, and had twisted columns. Now, one example is St. Peter's Square. Now, don't get confused. St. Peter Cathedral had Renaissance style. St. Peter's Square had more of Baroque. It was also by Michelangelo though. This is St. Peter's Square. And this was done by Michelangelo again. Now this is the twisted column or the Salmonic column that I was talking. Now lastly we have Rococo. Now Rococo can also be called as late Baroque. And this dealt a lot with interiors. Like the interior and the entire building flowed together. They used a lot of they were a lot delicate, they were more lighter compared to Baroque. They still had asymmetrical plannings, but they also used a lot of curves like Baroque. They used C-shaped curves and S-shaped curves. There was also something called Rococo, which is an ornamentation style that is made using shells and pebbles. So this is a Rococo. And they also had something called grottos, which is an artificial cave filled with ornamentation again. And they used a lot of vegetal, human, and geometric motifs. Vegetal is nothing but flowers, inspirations taken from flowers, plants, etc. And they used a lot of pastel color palette. So this is about Rococo. Then in the next video we can talk about neoclassicism. So what is that? In Renaissance they went back to classical architecture. So in Renaissance they went back to classical architecture, and they felt a bit bored, so they started exploring more and more in Mannerism, in and Baroque and Rococo. I mean, yes, Rococo was more elegant, but still it wasn't much like the Renaissance period. So what happened in neoclassicism is they went back to classical architecture again. Now we'll talk about neoclassicism in the next video. That's it.